This is Cross-Eyed, and I am your host, Bryant. And this evening, I have a good friend of mine joining us, Richard Tatina, and we'll be discussing the topic of abortion. But before we get started and he briefly introduces himself, let me read a quote to you by Gordon H. Clark. It's from a book called, or an essay on the ethics of abortion. And you'll see why I share this quote in a moment. And so I quote, any attempt to define morality by observational science is a logical fallacy. Science can invent new ways of killing people, but science can never determine who should be killed. And the reason I share that quote is because I believe the heart of the issue is morality. This is a moral issue more than it appears to be a political, legal, or even a health issue, if you want to approach it from a more scientific angle. Not to ignore or neglect those issues for is part of the discussion, but I think the core issue is a moral one. And so for that, I have Rick. I'll refer to him as Rick. Rick will be unpacking that a little bit for us. So before we do that, though, Rick, would you mind briefly introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Bryant. My name is Rick Tatina. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, raised in the suburbs here. I'm currently a pastor, a part of New Life Community Church, which has multiple locations in Chicagoland. I am blessed to pastor the location in Brookfield, Illinois. So New Life Brookfield is what we go by. We're a church plant from 2014, and I was able to become the location pastor there in 2016, and I've been there ever since. It's a good growing church. We center our worship services around God and a clear exposition of His Word, and here and there we try to give voice to, some of the things that our culture really needs to hear, and one of them being the issue of life here for the unborn. So, but yeah, as far as pastoring, I also love to engage in conversations about the gospel, about the Bible with strangers, with random people that I run into, and have two wonderful children and a wonderful wife named Nora. And we're just blessed to be used by God during this season.
Thanks for sharing that. So before we dive into the topic a little more, I guess, deeply, or start to unpack it, why don't we start off by first defining what is abortion?
Yeah, abortion. So, if you were to Google it, you'd find such a simple definition that almost empties abortion of its moral impact. And the definition that you'd find is a procedure to end pregnancy. And when you think about, a procedure to end pregnancy, it's removed of all moral implications. Is dumbed down. It's a sugar-coated definition that you're going to find. In fact, even if you Google procedures of abortion, which I know we're going to talk about, the first at least 7-8 pages of search results are all from pro-abortion websites. So, but I believe that we, of course, need to consider God in our definition of that. And I would say the definition is much more serious. The Bible would call abortion the shedding of innocent blood, and I would say it's the most innocent blood there is on the planet. So abortion is the termination of a human life, generally in the womb, through a procedure that is pretty horrific when you hear it described, and it's very prevalent in our world.
Thanks for that. Thanks for defining it as it should be defined. Um, but since you mentioned there's the procedure aspect of it, uh, would you mind, I guess, briefly talking about what is the procedure like?
Yeah, and there's a few procedures. So um, to not forget your quote in the beginning from Gordon Clark. Um, Interestingly, it talks about science and how science can be utilized to define morality. The more recent trend with abortion is that the abortion pill, as it's called, or the Plan B pill, which is it's called a abortion fascient, abortifacient, which is a pill that someone would take after they have just recently become pregnant or perhaps consider themselves to be pregnant. Um, and this pill blocks the uterine lining from getting nutrients to the unborn child. At this point, very, very, very small. It essentially starves out the fetus, and the woman can generally goes to the doctor for a follow-up visit and expels the dead fetus after a couple days, I believe. So this procedure, which is kind of much less intrusive from a medical standpoint, as far as like a doctor getting in there and removing the more formed unborn child, is actually getting close to about half of the abortions being performed, I think, in the US. So I remember thinking about that 10 years ago when they were first bringing out the pill, the abortion pill. Well, I think it's called RU486. There might be more than one, but in some cases it doesn't work, and the woman has to get a surgical abortion if that's what they're choosing. But aside from the abortion pill, um, there's a couple of major procedures. Suction aspiration is one where it's there's an instrument that dismembers the baby in the womb and sucks it out with like a vacuum type of procedure. I think this is 90% of induced abortions, according to some pro-life information sites in Louisiana. Um, the dilation and evacuation is one where um, the unborn child is they go into the skull, they crush it, and then they kind of suck out the the an infant. So, and then the most egregious, of course, is the partial birth abortion, which has gone, I think, back and forth from being banned. I think it's currently banned, but there's always, like you said, with science, they find ways to use injections. Like there was talk about using the same type of fluid that's injected when people are given capital punishment. Was a procedure where everything but the head is brought out, and there's something put into the skulls, and they suck the brains out and remove it. And this can be done nearly up till birth. So it's the saline injection procedure. I know these are kind of graphic and horrific things to describe for our listeners here, but definitely a must to understand the impact of what's really happening to these human beings. So, but one was like, it's almost like burning an infant alive with saline. It's used less and less from what I've read because it is a little more dangerous. So, but those are the major procedures. And they are, people who are for abortion sometimes mock. I don't know if they're mocking, but it comes across as a mocking where they would say these procedures or getting an abortion is safer than getting a root canal. And it's really such a sad state of the conversation or the debate that it even can stoop to that level. So, but those are the general procedures.
Yeah, thank you for going serving the options and
Mm,
available procedures. It is unfortunate, obviously, from our perspective and in light of our discussion. But I think that you've said, it's necessary to at least be aware of what procedures are being used, and I'm sure there might be others and more to come. Right, as you said, science continues to develop new or other more efficient, easier options or tools to carry out an abortion. But so then this provokes a question. Then you know, why do people get abortions to begin with? Why get abortions?
yeah, great question. There's if you do some digging into statistics, you'll see that from the Gut Marker Institute, which is a pro-abortion statistic research arm of Planned Parenthood, but they generally do have a lot of the information that other groups and organizations don't have. 90% of women give multiple reasons for why they seek abortions. In my opinion, contributing to, before you hear the stats, contributing to that is a whole kind of realm of how abortion is portrayed to people who are perhaps thinking about getting one. And it goes, from the whole safe, legal, and rare comments to, like I said, it's safer than a root canal. That's not a child in there. You can, like I said, you can Google from the Mayo Clinic and find that they will say the doctor removes tissue from your body. And so it's just fascinating to see the deception. Planned Parenthood's own website says a doctor or nurse uses medical instruments and gentle suction to remove the pregnancy from your uterus. So it takes 10 minutes. You're usually in the office and out of there in a few hours. And if there's nothing going on, there's nothing to hide, then why hide it in the language? But most abortions are for convenience, or the child is unwanted. I think it's 74% say that if they went to term with the child, it would drastically change their life. 73% say they don't think they can afford it. And just all kinds of factors that really funnel down into, this is inconvenient. This child is unwanted. And it's, and we've seen celebrities come out where they're saying, if I didn't get an abortion, I would not have been this, music star that I am now. I wouldn't have been able to have my acting career. This is becoming more and more popular on the popular level discussions by celebrities to say that. So, but it's mostly for convenience sake. And just to give you the numbers, because this is always brought up, and like I said, this is kind of part of the deception too, is that I think it's like less than 1% are when people are raped or have become pregnant from incest. And to save the mother is very rare too. So it does happen, but it is very rare. So the exceptions generally, like, like we got to save for the health of the mother. Those are used to argue into the norms, and that's not how it works. You don't argue from the peripheral into the norm. So, but that's what's happening, and that's usually what people think. That's usually the rationale they give because they haven't thought through it or looked through the statistics or looked at the numbers, or looked at the reasons. And they definitely stay in the dark in that respect. And they generally, which is so sad, they generally suffer afterwards a lot of mental and emotional pain and trauma. So,
How many people actually get abortions? Um,
Yeah. In the U.S., there's an abortion every 90 seconds. Um, in the world, since 1980, there's been about 1.6 billion with a B. Um, let's see. Just looking at some, United States statistics. Since 1973, when Roe versus Wade gave the green light for abortions in the country, 60 million or over 60 million abortions, and that's reported. I mean, there's probably more. Um, I think it's worth noting that a third of those are from African Americans who, as far as African American women, they make up 10% or so of the population, but yet get over 30% of the abortions. Um, so it's been just a place where that community has hit them, and so in New York, one city had more abortions than births. um, I think it was in 2014, China reported 14 million abortions in 1 year. And so um, most of the people getting abortions, I think they are let's see, women aged 15 through 44. I think they count for 30%. And these, you're always waiting for kind of new numbers to come out, so some of the numbers are a little bit older, but um, they definitely are still the same as they've been. And as far as the unborn, um, they you could, if you're looking at how many get abortions, you could add up all the deaths from all the world wars in history, World War I, World War II, and you could go back as far as you can go, and they would never add up to the amount of aborted children um, that we've eliminated as a human race. So
man, Eh, no, we've I guess so far have touched on it on a technical level, at a scientific level. You briefly touched on it from a moral angle, but let's briefly discuss it from a legal angle. Why do people argue for the right to an abortion using that language? Uh,
yeah.
whether they're trying to derive that from the Constitution or elsewhere, uh, and referring to it as a right, as a woman's right to her body, etc. Why do people argue for the right to an abortion? What do you think, and how would you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, if you look at history, this was something it happened when I wasn't born yet. So I remember getting a good handful of books, and in the U.S. there was a couple things that motivated um, people's desire for the right to terminate their pregnancies, and I think it was in the late '60s. There were one thing that was noted was there was a woman, and I can't remember her name. I'd have to go back and look. Who she made national news because she was pregnant, and for some reason she wanted to get an abortion, and but she couldn't get it in the States because it was illegal. And so the news picked up on this. They promoted it. They made it look like she was under this major duress because she had to go outside the country, or was debating going outside the country to get an abortion. And so I think this case was one of the things that really brought to the forefront of the American people's consciousness, was sympathy for this woman. And so there was another lady in the mid 60s who lost her life getting an illegal abortion. And there were others like that. But then I believe the major push was that women were being withheld a right that is inherently theirs, um, as those who would bear children. The feminist movement pushed this, and in my opinion, I would suppose that the sexual revolution of the 60s also contributed to the progress of these ideas, if you will. And not long after that, I remember just reading how there was this idea that the world was overpopulated, or was on the brink of like being overpopulated. We wouldn't have enough resources. This was in the 70s, and this is also when you see like Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which Planned Parenthood has an operation that works in the US and also outside the US internationally. So currently they receive federal funds for abortions outside the US. The Trump administration had actually pulled that funding. It generally flips back and forth. President Biden put the funding back in place, but this pushed abortion into the world. And when I mentioned China with 14 million, they were wrestling with their idea of like overpopulation, and this was a solution put forth to them. And I'm talking decades ago. And so these rights come from the idea that this is being withheld from someone who should be able to get it.
Good. Yeah, thank you for responding to that. And so let's as we approach the end of this episode, at least I know this conversation could continue on, and we could perhaps get into more issues or more details related to this topic. But I think enough has been said to, I think, make a clear case as to why this is such an important topic. But before we move towards discussing how perhaps people can get involved in the prevention of abortions, I want you to, if you don't mind, just continue to discuss the moral aspect of this.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it wrong to get an abortion?
Yeah, and just to back up one minute on the right to abortion, because it does relate to the morality thing that we'll talk about right now. In the 14th Amendment, a woman's right to choose to have an abortion fell within the right to privacy, and so that states could not infringe upon that right to privacy. The Supreme Court found that was the case. And there's a couple books to look at when you want to look at the argumentation of how Roe versus Wade relied upon faulty, I believe, science and information to make that decision. Francis Beckwith wrote one book. I think it's called Right to Life, or it's called something Life, but his book's really good. More deals with the argumentation. But the arguing that I have a right does not mean that you have a right in God's eyes. And so that's where I tend to, or I think everyone must have morality defined as it stems from our Creator. So yeah, abortion is the taking of innocent life. The life in the womb does not deserve to die; it deserves to live. Life is created in the image of God. We know that from the first books of the Bible. We learn from the second book of the Bible that we should not murder, and murdering is the taking of innocent life. You can go through places in the Bible where, like in Proverbs, it tells us that 6 things God hates, 7 which are an abomination to them: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. And that's one of the verses that I think is just can't get any clearer. on the mind of God regarding the loss of life in the womb, and how we have, as people and as organizations and governments, we have made it into a money-making business. Billions of dollars generated. It is worldwide. It is promoted. It is like in the state of Illinois, just this last year, 2021, our governor here made it okay for minors to get an abortion without their parents' consent. And so it's just mind-boggling to me that in the name of women's rights that or rights that are granted in the Constitution, supposedly, that we are defying clear scriptural mandates for us. So, but in the New Testament, we see that Jesus and John the Baptist were each called children in the womb. Mary was with child. Elizabeth was John the Baptist's mother. And when she met Mary, the mother of Jesus, the child leapt for joy in the womb. John the Baptist was filled with the Holy Spirit in the womb. So we just see like God's imprint and personal characteristics of the person in the womb. And God in the Old Testament takes direct responsibility for creating us, knitting us together, forming our ligaments and different things, like in Jeremiah chapter 1, in Psalm 139, we see how wonderfully we are made by God, even in the womb. So this is just a strike against God. I believe it's an affront to God and just a defiant posture of we decide, God, we decide when we take life or not. And I think it's just atrocious and destroys countries and nations because they fill their land with innocent blood. So it's one thing to say about that argumentation that I just gave, arguing it from a biblical perspective. It's really the only way you can really 100% approach it when you want to give people the full weight of what this entails before God. Because in 2016, and I watched this unfold, two people, David Dalladin and Sandra Merritt, they if you don't know about this, it's just fascinating. They set up these shell companies, or these kind of fake companies that were, one of them was like a company that studied tissue research, fetal tissue research. And the other was another company in the same type of industry. So what they did was they set up these companies, they got them approved by the IRS, and they went and met with executives and major people at Planned Parenthood, like around the country. And they had hidden cameras. They had a camera in their eyeglasses. They met for lunch. They got to see actual tissues of the aborted unborn child in these offices they were in. They had discussions about how Planned Parenthood was trying to secure tissue after the abortions for the sale of tissue research, and just how callous and how business-like this whole industry was of abortion and getting money for tissues and tissue research, and how it benefits people, and they doing it over lunch. And when they gathered all these videos and they started to drop these videos on YouTube, the media wouldn't bite, wouldn't even report them for weeks. And I remember every day on Google News, I would search the Planned Parenthood videos, and it would not come. It took 2 weeks or more because it just got so big that you couldn't ignore it. that finally it came out that, wow, this is shocking. And and a lot of people didn't watch the videos because they were attacked by the media and by Planned Parenthood and by others who support abortion. They were said to be selectively edited. They were, and even Kamala Harris, when she was the attorney in California, prosecuted those two, David Dalladin and Sandra Merritt, for recording things that the person who they were meeting with didn't know they were being recorded, and they still, I think the one of the judges was David Orrick, or I think I got his name right. He's currently in the Biden administration. He was one who ruled against David and Sandra for making these videos, and some of the videos are still not released because they were collected as evidence. But I say all that to say the biggest story of our lifetime on the exposure of the inner workings of the abortion industry couldn't even make the news until it was too big to ignore. And even when it came out, it was in a sense like squashed and maligned and whitewashed. And all of that to say is that people will continue in their sin, no matter if they're faced with the video evidence of things. Even though that is helpful, it really does take the confrontation, in a sense. Now I'm talking more about like the confronting those who are promoting it, and the government involvement in it, with the morality of it. And so I think the visual parts have been there. We have known for years what an ultrasound will show us. We have these videos of the formation of life in the womb, and these amazing high resolution camera shots of unborn babies moving around, and we know when they have fingerprints, their heartbeats, and we still are killing them. So the science is not, it's a component to seeing the truth, but we are still set on this being a solution for unwanted pregnancies.
Well, in light of all that, how can we get involved in preventing abortions? And, or you could even add perhaps some resources you would recommend to be more informed and prepared to tackle this issue or discuss it, what have you. What resources would you recommend, and also how can we get involved in preventing abortions? That perhaps as a church and as individuals, what would you say to that?
Yeah, great question. Someone said this, you may not be able to fill every lane, in regards to, being a voice for those who don't have a voice, say for the unborn in this case, but you can fill a lane. So you can do something. One of the things you can do is definitely pray for them, pray for the mothers. I want to say this. I do think that it's a misnomer that the pro-life community only cares about the infants in the womb, that they don't care about the mothers. And this is not true. I have part of my history in this movement, and then just being involved, is it came from, seeing my parents. They were people who were part of starting up and getting pregnancy centers in a nearby town. My mom was a pregnancy counselor for years. I, raised support for pro-life organizations, helped, I was a table host at some of their major, fundraising events. And it's something where you see that, no, they really do care about everyone involved. They encourage the mother to keep the child, and even when they don't, they stay with them. They They keep in contact with them. There's counseling, there's support when mothers do keep their child through uh, pregnancy centers. They are involved in like providing for her needs. I've seen this over and over. But yeah, praying, talking, when you have conversations, when you're in a conversation and someone says it's not a human being till it comes out of the womb, that's a time where you should hopefully gently say, is that what the Bible says? Wasn't Jesus called a child in the womb? And the word fetus just means unborn human offspring. So it's Latin for that. So it's still talking about a human being. When you're in a discussion with someone who's not for life, who supports abortion, one of the best tips I can give comes from Greg Kokel, and Scott Klusendorf wrote a book, I think it's called Life, where he talks about the art of pro-life persuasion. And he said the main thing you have to do is you always have to remember and keep at the forefront of the discussion that the unborn person is a human being. Whenever you try to argue from, rape and incest situations or different things on the side, you're moving away from the real issue, which is that this is a human being created in the image of God who should be and must be defended. And so always keep that, and you will see some people not give up their position on abortion and will actually say it's okay to kill human beings, and they'll say it because that's the end logic of their argument. So be informed, know these statistics, find out, keep an eye on the news and what you hear about it. I think the main thing is for Christians to know that they are mandated in the Bible to speak up for those who have no voice. Proverbs tells us to do that. Multiple places we are told to do that. But you can financially, if you're thinking about financially, you can donate to quite a few pregnancy centers around. A lot of them are specific to where people live. And one I would say is this: as a pastor, encourage your pastor, if he hasn't, to perhaps, on the Sanctity of Life Sunday, which is usually the last couple weeks in January, to give. It's actually a federally recognized day where he should maybe read something or say something in support of those children who are aborted, and to give encouragement and a place of healing and forgiveness and so forth to those who maybe have had abortions. I think sometimes it's just not talked about, so that no one knows where to go. No one knows what really God thinks about it. They feel, it isn't right, but they just don't know, what is God's posture toward it. So some people are really intense. They're out there at the clinics and they're counseling. They call it sidewalk counseling people who are walking into the clinic, and they just pray for them, and they stand there with a sign. They ask them, "Can I pray for you?" And they try to encourage them not to get an abortion. This is another level, but I think it's needed. So those are a bunch of ways that you can get involved. There's some websites like abort73.com. You could check out. There's some YouTube movies that you could check out, like Maafa 21, MAAFA 21. I think you can find it on YouTube, and just to be informed on some of those things.
Rick, thank you for that. Thank you for being willing to have this discussion, and for all the information you shared, for the reasoning behind it, for for your not only your knowledge but your experience, engaging this issue, and also for the resources and recommendations you gave. I think that's greatly appreciated. And I hope those listening will benefit from all of this. So, just want to thank you for your time and for joining me tonight, this evening, to discuss this topic. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Can I say one last thing?
Of course, go
It
for
would
it.
be I'd be remiss to not say, that of course, Jesus Christ offers um, his blood, on behalf of anyone who's been involved in any of, you know, promoting abortion or having one or anything that would fall under that. I remember reading something from John Piper that said, you know, parents who have encouraged their kids to get one can also find forgiveness. So I know it sounds harsh, it sounds stark, but in reality, I think we as a culture have drifted so far away from where God is that we don't. When we hear the truth, like God hates hands that shed innocent blood. I mean, wow, that's shocking. That's because we're so far removed from where we should be there. But yeah, but that the blood of Jesus Christ it covers, it covers those things too. So
But once again, thank you for joining us. And that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Good night.